Of all the games I've ever played, I commonly cite Heavy Rain as the single worst one. I dogged on it non-stop when I reviewed it back in March of 2021, and even though that video does hold up somewhat, a series of audio glitches and the fact that I didn't actually beat the game before making the video makes it outdated in my eyes. But now that it's been over a year, I've decided to push through and beat the whole game. After all, if I managed to beat Jack 2, which is not only terrible, but extremely hard too, I could definitely beat Heavy Rain, since it's not even hard at all. So now that I've played through the whole thing, I don't want to hear a word about how I'm being unfair to the game. I've given this thing 15 hours of my life that I'll never get back, and I even managed to get the best possible ending on this playthrough. So I've seen practically all that it has to offer, I'm really good at it, and I have plenty of room to judge this game now due to that. First off, I'd like to mention the visuals, and more broadly the presentation in general. The visuals are sometimes quite good and fit the aesthetic of a noir crime drama, but in terms of sheer fidelity and character models, it almost never looks much better than an HD PS2 game. This game was marketed as some big step forward for motion capture and character models, but in actuality does worse in both aspects than Uncharted 1 and 2, Killzone 2, Ratchet & Clank Future, and Resistance 2, all of which came out at least an entire year before this game. Graphics do not make or break a game, but if your game is being pushed as some groundbreaking new step in realism in gaming, and yet you have character models like Ethan's wife that look straight out of 1998, then you're just a group of liars, and it's not as if this is some massive open world game with thousands of interactions. It's a linear game with, granted, multiple endings and outcomes, but still no more than possibly 25 hours of content at most. The motion capture is pretty decent for the characters' bodies most of the time, but still feels very awkward when the action finally starts to pick up. And as for their faces, they look absolutely awful considering when the game was released, and once again the major lie that was told that this game was like an interactive drama film. It would have been groundbreaking if this came out as a PS2 or Dreamcast launch title, but for a game in 2010, this is not impressive at all, and what's worse is that the editing of fight scenes and even basic parts of the game is incredibly sloppy. Scenes are cut together in an embarrassing way that makes them feel very hard to take seriously, and even the audio editing is awful. For example, the music sounds terrible at some points. The music outside of the game itself is alright, it fits the game well and sounds totally fine, making it probably the best aspect of the whole game. The only problem is that it often sounds terrible within the game for no discernible reason. The sound editing suffers in many other respects too, with voice lines being edited in a very awkward way, and in general everything feels like it was automated and without any real work from a team of humans to improve upon these aspects, and trust me, that point is one we'll be coming back to a lot. But the final nail in the coffin for this presentation, the problem that makes the subpar visuals, awful editing, and dilapidated interpretation of the music look like nothing, is the acting. The acting is physically fine, like I said, but the delivery of lines is so absolutely shameful at every turn, with so many of them sounding like they came from a robot, and I can't even hear them sometimes because the music is so loud that I can't even hear what the damn characters are saying.
Nothing can justify it anyway. I feel nothing but contempt for you. Nothing but contempt.
So to show you the hilariously bad acting in this game, I've prepared a little montage for you all.
You again? If you're looking for trouble, you found it. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you.
Oh, do you know what he said about you?
What'd he say?
The bastard! I'll sort him out!
You're not gonna help those bastards kill my Johnny. I'll do it on my own.
Jason! Jason! Jason!
Your idiot son killed all those kids, didn't he? He's the origami killer.
No! No! He's innocent! He's not a killer! Not a killer! He kidnapped that kid and he held him under the water for a little too long.
Dad, it's John! He fell into a pond!
Ah,
He's
get out of
drowning!
here, you little pest! Leave me
You gotta
alone!
come, Dad! Come on! John's gonna die! John's gonna die!
Well, that'll be one less greedy mouth to feed, won't it? Go away!
Please, Dad! I'm begging you! John's gonna die! John's gonna
What did
die,
I
Dad!
tell ya? Scrap!
If that wasn't bad enough, I forgot to even mention how there are a plethora of glitches and unprofessional moments, such as the broken glass during this one chapter's Ethan being so obviously one texture laid over the ground, leading to it floating in mid-air when the tunnel itself dips down, yet the glass stays at the exact same height. The truth is that I just can't take a single part of this game seriously. Before we get into how bad the gameplay and story may be, the story is already massively damaged because the acting is so stilted and robotic, with absolutely zero emotion and character from pretty much any of the characters. The story is about a lot of depressing, interesting themes with tons of emotional moments, but I can't take a single one of them seriously because all of the characters are just a bunch of insufferable cyborgs. I couldn't care less if any of them died, and I only tried my hardest to keep them alive so I can get the best ending and show this game who's boss. Detroit is presented incredibly well in practically every way, so it at least has good enough presentation and acting to pass as a film, whereas Heavy Rain could never be mistaken for any sort of film, even a terrible one due to the awful presentation. I honestly feel like Detroit was made just to show how bad the characters in Heavy Rain were by comparing humans to robots, and having the robots come off as more human. Detroit is a game that I personally think is great in nearly every way, and since it's so similar to Heavy Rain, I'll be comparing them a few more times throughout this review. So if the presentation is awful and unbearable, you can at the very least confide in the gameplay to save it. I mean, just look at Nintendo games. They don't always look very good or have the best acting, but they have incredible gameplay to make up for it. Although, to be perfectly honest, that comparison is way more insulting to Nintendo than I intended because none of their games come even close to Heavy Rain in terms of screwing up the presentation. But regardless, the gameplay is really what makes or breaks most games, and Heavy Rain has a pretty promising gameplay style. That is, if you think changing diapers is good gameplay, you thought I was gonna start kissing up to the game, didn't you? Well, nope. The gameplay is even worse than the presentation. For starters, pretty much nothing happens in the first few chapters, with you simply waiting around and managing tasks during a multitude of chapters. They drag on and on with an open time slot that makes them feel like they'll never end, which just makes them boring in the worst way possible. The game is done using stop time events and quick time events just like Detroit, with you playing as Ethan and handling your kids, Scott and investigating the parents of a criminal named the Origami Killer's victims, Madison trying to sleep, and Norman investigating crime scenes involving the killer using your high-tech glasses. Without even getting into the awful controls that use R2 to move because the game is desperate to be unique, all of the characters' missions start out as incredibly boring, other than Scott, I guess, with nearly 90% of them being the boring open-ended missions I referred to earlier. And in my original review, I complained that there was nothing like the scanner from Detroit to make your objectives more clear, but to be fair, you can listen to the character's thoughts and it has a somewhat similar effect, but that doesn't save the game from the fact that these chapters comprise of mostly just waiting around and doing boring tasks. Thankfully, we get a bit more variety with the regular missions and then the only actually exciting missions in the action scenes full of QTE fights. These scenes are practically non-existent until the last third, and don't really start to be exciting until the last 20% of the game. But hey, I'll admit that they're pretty fun. The whole game other than this is so damn boring, yes, even Ethan's trials, so these are a nice change of pace. The problem is that they're severely lacking in variety, with you having to get out of a dangerous situation in a car literally 3 times, and fights against other people that overstay their welcome and go on for far too long than they need to. There are a few chapters that I enjoyed playing through, such as the escape from the doctor's basement and the investigation into the killer's house, and to be fair, the final 5 chapters or so are all pretty entertaining. But notice how I've been using the word entertaining and not the word good. These scenes are pretty fun and tense at points, but with the terrible acting, bad characters, awful writing, and repetition that plagues even the best parts of the game, they're far from actually good. They're like a cheesy movie with a funny or entertaining scene. It doesn't make the movie good, just a little bit of it enjoyable. In fact, I'd say this game is kind of like the Jason Takes Manhattan of gaming, because at its best it's cheesy and hilarious, but most of the time it's just embarrassing and boring, which is the worst kind of low quality. And if I'm getting secondhand embarrassment for the developers and actors, then you know it's not well made, and this game fits that category better than perhaps any other I've ever played. I'm sure there are other games that are equally as cringy, but I doubt any could truly surpass Heavy Rain. When it becomes a stupid action movie, I enjoy it, but I don't like it. Compare this to Detroit Become Human, where nearly every chapter has action with tons of variety, ranging from investigations to pre-constructions for platforming and fighting alike, to chase scenes, to tense stealth scenes, to fight scenes, all of which feel unique, unlike Heavy Rain. There's a lot to enjoy in that game, and it's presented well enough that it both looks and plays the part, whereas Heavy Rain does neither. The game is just boring in terms of gameplay most of the time, and when it's entertaining, it's so poorly presented and repetitive that I can't even lie to you and say that it's good with a straight face. And I know we're all so sick of false advertising misleading us into buying bad games. So I took the liberty of creating an accurate ad for Heavy Rain. Enjoy. Are you sick of action? Do you need something that will really make you wonder why you play video games?
You shall regret confronting the emissary of the Lord. You shall know divine power.
I'm so glad you asked. Introducing the new game, Heavy Rain. Change baby's diapers. Burp the baby after feeding it milk. Cook your son only 1 slice of pizza. That little bastard doesn't deserve any more. Sit there menacingly as your son does his homework. No wonder the cops thought you were the origami killer. I mean, look at that face. Yeesh. Take a shower. And get this, you can even dress like a stripper to interrogate a drug dealer, but make sure you ruffle your hair and have it stay the exact same. And finally, play virtual wall ball while waiting to meet someone. Because of all the important parts of the story for us to play through, sitting in the waiting room is definitely on the top of that list. Heavy Rain. It's like the Phantom Menace if it was trying to be a deep, sprawling story with social messages. That would be ridiculous. Wait a minute. Okay, so we've established that the presentation and gameplay are terrible, but what about the story? After all, this is a heavily story-driven game, so let's see what it has to offer. The story of Heavy Rain follows Ethan, a father of 2 children who loses his eldest son Jason due to a car crash outside of a mall early into the game, and a while later has his younger son Sean kidnapped by the origami killer. This ties into Scott Shelby, who is trying to catch the killer, Norman, who is trying to catch the killer, and Madison, who has insomnia, and so she just kinda gets tied up into all of this somehow. There are a few things I actually like about this story, so before I start tearing into it, let me just quickly say that I ended up actually liking Norman a bit. Madison, Ethan, and even Scott at some points feel like robots, and even though Norman's actor doesn't do that good of a job, I really do find Norman's progression within the mystery to be interesting, and the chapter where you have to frantically search through your clues to find the origami killer right before time's up is likely my favorite in the whole game. The rest of the characters totally suck in nearly every way, but I will say that Madison has quite a few really cool moments like this. Apart from this, I actually believe that the concept of this story is actually promising. I think the mystery of the origami killer and the way he kills his victims could make for a good, dark story, even though it totally doesn't. And I also like the concept of a corrupt cop that we get in Lieutenant Blake, but his character is taken way too far, which just ruins it. Okay, so now I can finally start tearing into this awful dumpster fire of a story. And my first complaint is that Jason's death makes absolutely zero sense. First off, the kid is a total idiot for wandering out onto the street like that, especially considering that he's 10, not like 4 or something. Second off, it makes no sense to me how he managed to get across the street the other way perfectly fine, but then couldn't manage to get back. And finally, the way Ethan jumps and grabs Jason would have totally protected Jason from dying, and in fact would have made way more sense if that in fact killed Ethan instead. Furthermore, once we get to Scott Shelby, we get the first instance of him being conveniently there when someone's about to die or get hurt. This happens at least thrice from my recollection, with him being there and having an asthma attack at the exact moment that a man goes in and tries to attack Lauren Winters, being there right when Hassan is mugged by a criminal, and then again with him showing up just in time to save another character who tries to commit suicide. Moving on to Madison, she has one of the dumbest excuses for being forced into this game ever. Get ready, because I'm not making this up. Her condition is that she has insomnia, but she doesn't have insomnia if she sleeps in motels. Is it just me, or is that one of the dumbest things of all time? This game is full of ridiculous things like that, which exist solely to push the plot forward by whatever means necessary, even if it makes the plot completely stupid. For example, the fact that after driving against traffic to complete one of the killer's trials, the cops, who were chasing after Ethan through his entire drive, managed to not show up for enough time so that he can get out of a burning car and walk slowly away to the back of a building. Not only are the characters robotic and one-dimensional, not only does the story lack anything deeper underneath the surface, and not only are all of its attempts at emotion incredibly forced and hollow, but the basic plot has more holes in it than the locations that are part of Dean Pelton's projects.
Here, right next to the truck stop with 3 thumbs.
Those aren't thumbs.
Yet another example is in the second trial, where the killer somehow sprinkled broken glass through a tube. How? Not to mention, once you figure out who the killer actually is, it makes somehow even less sense. I suppose if the killer was a little person, then it would have been possible, but they aren't, so it's ridiculous and nonsensical. And it just keeps coming through the whole game. In the chapter Fugitive, for example, the cops for some ungodly reason wait outside of Ethan's location for just enough time that he and Madison can escape. Nor do they stop Madison from entering the location of who they believe is a violent serial killer. In the chapter Manfred, the old man who owns the shop somehow dies after being away for less than 2 damn minutes, with no signs of forced entry anywhere, making it apparent to me from that point onwards that Scott Shelby was the killer, and none of the red herrings they placed later on could change my mind. And I actually ended up being right. This scene isn't bad in its own right, but it ruins the plot twist that is otherwise pretty well done, hurting the story majorly as a whole. After this, there's the infamous scene where Scott Shelby gets revenge on the billionaire oil tycoon Kramer by ramming Lauren Winters' car through his mansion, somehow managing to gun down all of his highly trained and armed guards with 1 pistol and 1 clip of ammo, and then for some reason asks Kramer about the killer's mother even though he is the killer, which means it makes no sense, especially since he's not doing it in front of anyone else for whom he's putting up a facade. Also, I find it hilarious how Kramer claims that his son killed a child just for fun, as if that makes any sense, and the fact that neither Lauren nor Shelby are suspected of anything that happened there, despite Scott literally leaving her car in the mansion. It's just swept under the rug later on. And finally, the grandmother of all insulting scenes is the one in which Madison speaks with Scott's mother, who has Alzheimer's. Not only is the way they handled the disease insulting due to how obviously it's used as a device for them to employ a progression tactic of jogging her memory, but they also have her whisper the name of the killer into Madison's ear for no reason other than to hide it from the player. It would make sense if the camera went away for a second while she just told her or something, but having the character actually make a conscious choice that causes it to be hidden from the audience for no in-game reason makes zero sense. But thankfully that's all. I honestly am astonished by how many giant plot holes and idiotic moments I managed to pick up on without even having to look back over the chapters. In most media, plot holes aren't so abundant and are harder to spot, but this game shows them off loud and proud, wearing them like a badge of honor. And shove that badge onto its vest alongside terrible characters, awful acting, mediocre visuals, awkward editing, boring and repetitive gameplay, and a basic as hell story, and you have one massive dumpster fire. Of all the crappy games I've ever had the displeasure of experiencing, this one remains at the top. Even though I've given it as much of a chance to change my mind as possible, this game remains awful. Comparing this game to Detroit shows just how bad Heavy Rain is, because it truly isn't even close in a single aspect. Jack 2 set a new bar for trash back in January, and Strider 2 managed to cross that bar back in April. But now I've gone a bit without being super tough on a game, and I've given high scores to quite a few. I thought I'd return to the genesis of garbage, Heavy Rain, which doesn't just cross the bar, it takes it across the river Styx and into the depths of hell. So yeah, Heavy Rain is a terrible game, and it gets a 1 out of 5, remaining the worst game I have ever played.